Welcome to PalacioMagazine.com podcast Voices in Our Heads. My name is Antonio Ruiz, and my guest today is René Castro, Director of Community Engagement for Century Villages at Cabrillo. Good afternoon, René.
Hi, Antonio. How are you?
Good. Before we get into what you're currently doing, I'd like to begin with some background on you. I've known you for some time as an advocate, as an educator, mentor, and organizer. Heck, you've taught me a lot of things. Tell us a little bit about how you arrived at your career. Where did you come from and where did you go to school?
So thanks for having me. I grew up in Northeast Los Angeles, and I've been a social worker for the last 30 years. So I did a lot of direct practice early in my career, back in the 80s. Work with adults with severe and persistent mental illness. And it was in that job and working with adults in locked facilities that I found I really, really have a knack for facilitation. And I really enjoyed it. And then I started to get more involved.
Explain that for people who might not know what facilitation means.
Getting people to talk to each other, to listen to each other. And I found that if I can get adults with severe mental illness to actually talk together, I think I could get just about anybody to talk to each other. So that's getting people to talk, look at each other, listen to one another, problem solve together. So now it's much more about problem solving. And then I wasn't ready for graduate school. I had my bachelor's in UCLA, and I was nervous about getting a master's. Frankly, I didn't think I could do it, and I just heard about the Peace Corps and decided to apply, and I applied for the most remote location I possibly could find.
Which was?
Federated States of Micronesia. I was on the island of Ponape in the Eastern Carolines. I didn't even know where Micronesia was.
I was going to say, where is it? It's in South Pacific.
It's like you start with Auckland, New Zealand, and you go 4,000 miles north, 6 degrees above the equator, Ponape, right there. So it's part of 1 million square miles of open ocean. It's a trust territory of the U.S. and beautiful place. It was gorgeous. So
and you were there for how long?
I was there for 2 years.
Wow.
2 years, yeah. I loved it. It was phenomenal. I recommend to anybody in your audience to consider the Peace Corps.
And what did you do there?
I taught elementary school, all subjects. I did some youth development projects, ran a volleyball tournament, just anything to get young people active and engaged.
What language?
They speak Ponapean.
Okay, which is?
It's. So I'll give you, say hello in Ponapean is Kasalelia. Okay. So with you, since you and I are peers, I would say Kasalelia. But if I was speaking to someone who was older, I would say Kasalelia with a lot of respect. Yeah. So, yeah.
But this was an island.
It was an island. Mm-hmm.
So 2 years on an island.
2 years on an island. Yep.
And how big an island are we talking about here?
Actually about the size of Long Beach. 8 miles by 8 miles. Okay. That's right. I never actually made that connection. But
what impact did that have on you?
It was huge. I was 27 at the time. And I was just glad to be on a plane, out of Los Angeles. It was the first time I'd really traveled anywhere internationally. So here it was on the federal government, and I was making $11 a day and having the time of my life and fishing and eating rice, and so I lost about 50 pounds. I weighed nothing, but just had incredible. So I think I became a man. I learned to face myself and my own ghosts, and became very comfortable with my own solitude. Actually, yeah.
And when you left and you came back,
I left. I came back. I started working for LA Unified, on a temporary basis, and taught in East LA. I taught a Chicano English class. And then I started applying for graduate school, and applied to Berkeley and UCLA and University of Washington up in Seattle, and UW gave me a free ride, so that's where I went. And yeah.
And at what point did you at any point there sort of say, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life in terms of after graduate school?
It's a really interesting question, because I would say throughout my career, every 5 to 7 years, it completely changes. So I knew that I wanted to lean into complex, difficult problems. I knew I wanted to be what we call a macro social worker, or community social worker. But in terms of issues, I knew my career would be moving around. So I just knew I wanted to lean into some hard problems, and I knew I know how to facilitate and connect systems, and that was about it. I would say the one thing I knew I could do well was facilitate. Yeah.
And at some point, because some of the jobs you took on were, you were first a social worker, right? And then you went to CCEJ, and then obviously, eventually building healthy communities. But talk about some of those early jobs and what you did and what you learned.
So just to clarify, I've always been a social worker,
right?
And I'm still a social worker.
Right.
Always identify. People ask me at parties, "What are you?" I'm a social worker.
Right.
So early on, actually worked for the city of Long Beach with their Human Dignity program, and we addressed hate crimes and intergroup conflict in the city. A great program. Worked a lot with the police department and our local colleges to prevent hate crimes and also to help victims out. And then after that, I worked for CCEJ for 13 years and did a lot of diversity and inclusion type programming for high school students, corporations. I loved it. It was great. Great organization. And then after that was the California Endowment came into town about 2008. And they recruited me to be the first hub manager for building healthy communities locally. And did that for 4 years. And I had a ball. I learned a lot about organizing. I learned that it's incredibly difficult work, but I was just so inspired by the campaigns and the work that we did.
Kind of step back here and talk just before we go to a break about your work at CCJ, because one of the things that what years were this?
That was 2001 to 2012.
Because, in terms of dealing with hate crimes and just trying to bring people together to dialogue, what lessons from those times can we learn today? Because it seems like we're still talking about the same things from the early 2000s, the 1970s.
Right, yeah. Well, I think the lesson is that these are perishable skills, that the task of the human race is to understand one another and to come to terms with our diversity. And we get to a point, I think, where a lot of people felt with Obama being elected that we were now in a post-racial society. And of course now we see that we're far from the case. Those of us who were in the work knew that we weren't in a post-racial society. And frankly, I don't think we ever will achieve that. So I think the lesson is that we have to continually be vigilant about addressing our own fears of difference, and we just you can't ever back away from these things. They're just our reaction to difference, I think, is almost embedded in our genes, and it's very difficult to overcome that genetic code many times. But I think we can, though, with a lot of effort. But I even for myself, working in issues like that for as long as I have, I still carry privilege. I still carry a lot of things that I need to learn and address my own biases constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay. Yeah. So before we go on to talk about your work today, let me take one break, and then when we return, we'll get you to predict talk about what you're doing now, and then later on to predict the future. This is Voices in Our Heads. When we come back, we'll have more with René Castro. This is Antonio Ruiz for PalacioMagazine.com. Welcome back to Voices in Our Heads. I'm Antonio Ruiz, and our guest is René Castro, who's the Director of Community Engagement for Century Villages at Cabrillo. So, talk about what your current position is here. Well, first of all, why don't we talk about what Century Villages is, and then what you do here.
Yeah, great. So Century Villages is a nonprofit. Century Villages at Cabrillo, or CVC, is a nonprofit housing developer, property manager, and we also provide support services for the residents that live here. We're currently sitting on a 28-acre campus. We house 1,300 formerly homeless veterans and families here in this campus. So we provide, the property management. We collect the rent, maintain the grounds, and also provide a lot of support for our residents, along with about 20 nonprofit partners that are based on this campus. And
it's just housing that you provide, or is it
housing? It depends upon the program. So if you're a vet, you're working with U.S. vets and the VA. So you're getting a housing voucher, and you're getting meals, and you're getting a lot of, if you have PTSD, you're getting a lot of support there. But we also have, shelter programs here, transitional housing for people in recovery. And then we have permanent housing where people are just here because they're low income, they've been on the streets, and they needed low income housing, and that's what we provide.
One of the things that when I have visited here before is, I've seen families.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen families with children. I've seen, so there's a lot more than just vets and.
Absolutely.
Because when people think homelessness, they just think, single adult males.
Yeah, exactly.
Or women.
Well, that's the thing that strikes me, Antonio, about coming on the campus is everyone you see here when you walk through the campus has been formerly homeless. And I think, I'm looking at a 3-year-old and I'm thinking, was he born into homelessness? And it's fascinating when you watch the families, because a lot of times you see the children, they know they're in a safe space. And right now we're conducting our interview next to this grand lawn, which I love because the kids just run because they're safe. And you just see them, they're just running and just enjoying the space. So it's that's really gratifying to see. So a lot of families, it's really a neighborhood, much like any neighborhood in Long Beach.
Right. Give some examples of some other support services, because I know that there's a whole list of things, because there's schools and stuff like that.
Well,
education,
Yeah. So there's after-school tutoring. We're partnered with the Children's Clinic. There's 6 beds over there where you can, any child, any adult in this whole campus can get primary health care services. There's a campus store. You can get toilet paper and things like that. Then we have career training. We partner with a lot of organizations, workforce development, the city of Long Beach. Constantly having resources coming onto the campus to provide job coaching, career fairs. This Friday we're having a health fair along with 20 of our partners. We're really trying to not only house people, but the thing I'm realizing that's really challenging is these are families that have experienced trauma, and they need a lot of support. And we're really, really proud of the fact that 97% of the people who come on this campus stay housed. That's a lot. That's pretty good. After you've been on the street for 5-10 years, that's pretty good. So it takes there are 300 people on this campus in any given day providing a variety of resources. So that's a ratio of 1 to 3, but that's what it takes.
And how many people are on?
1,300.
1,300. I am going to get to talking about your specific job, but I do want to address this issue of homelessness before we started talking, you hear so much about people wanting to solve homelessness. That if you just provided a home, even if it's you've seen them, the little 1-bedroom box in a that all your problems will be solved. Right. You've discovered a long time ago that's not.
That's right.
That's not the solution.
Right. No way. Although we could be doing more just to house people. So, I mean, we're talking about an issue that's on a macroeconomic scale, right? A structural issue of inequity where a huge portion of our population, 47,000 in LA County by last count, have been completely left behind from the new economy. So there's so many reasons. I mean, education, just the structure of the economy itself. But what I've found since I've been here, and it's been relatively new, only about 5 months, is that take your typical person like you, right? Say God forbid you lose a key family member, you go into depression, you start drinking, you lose your job. Next thing you know, you can't make the mortgage, you lose your house, no family around to support, you're homeless. That's it. That's all it takes. And I've heard story after story after story. A lot of domestic violence, a lot of women with children. That's a key reason for homelessness. So it's a variety of stories, but I think that the economy itself has frankly failed a lot of people. And I think when we look at that number, 47,000, that's the number of people on the street. That's not how many people we would say are, housing insecure or housing vulnerable. So it's a big structural problem. So right now it's funny. I actually called a couple of my colleagues at Mental Health America and a couple of other organizations. Like, how can we hack housing? I'm a social worker, so I'm used to. A person calls me. I'm used to really problem solving with them on helping to address their issue, not just giving them a phone number to the multi-service center, which is fine. But so I'm really interested in hacking this whole problem we call homelessness. So when someone calls me, I can say, call Antonio over at, Catholic Charities. He'll get you in for, 9, whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like, I'm learning that. Right. That's something that I really is a goal of mine.
I want to get a little bit more into the holistic approach in the next segment, but let's talk a little bit about what you do now.
Sure. So Century Villages has a director for resident services, and they provide a lot of the primary support for residents. We have a director for property management, and his job is to collect the rents, make sure the place looks good, and then they just created a new position for community engagement. So my job is really to really, I guess in a way, make Century a viable neighborhood, right? So right now, okay, you look at this and you go, okay, this is a community. It's walled off, but we're bringing in the buses now. We're starting to become a more porous community. So like every neighborhood needs to tap into the resources outside of it. And that's my job, is to really enhance partnerships. So just starting with police department, working with West Division and getting to know our commander and teaching the residents that, you pay taxes, you can call 911 or you can call the non-emergency line, and then connecting with fire. And now we're connecting with CERT. Now we're connecting with Long Beach City College, assets. Right. That's what neighborhoods do. You connect with local assets and people. And that's what I love doing is connecting this campus with local assets. And then I'm writing some grants and doing our Twitter feed, which I've doubled the number of followers since I've started in 5 months. So follow me at Century Villages. Yeah, I'm having a blast.
Yeah, and I'm just before we go to a break, I mean, one of the things that's always been interesting about this place, first of all, I mean, it's sort of in a, butting up against a 47, but you're only blocks from, really close to Cabrillo High School, and then the whole neighborhood. You're not far from PCH.
That's right.
I mean, not PCH, I'm sorry, Santa Fe.
Santa Fe, yep.
So really trying to figure out a way how to connect all of that is really sort of important so that people don't have a sense of belonging.
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. And, a lot of our residents, of course, use the bus, and we're very fortunate to have a great partnership with Long Beach Transit. And now we're building, completing the new West Side Transit Hub. So connectivity is really important to us. I ride my bike to work every day, and it's not pretty crossing PCH. But the thing is, we're very fortunate to have 28 acres of land. The city, we didn't buy this land. It was bequeathed to us by the city, although the city still owns it, of course. we maintain it. So with that, though, meant that we're in the middle of heavy industrial area. We abut Tesoro Refinery, the Terminal Island Freeway, as you said, PCH in Santa Fe. This is heavy industry. So we're constantly looking at ways to preserve the air quality for our residents, and that's a big job.
Okay. We'll kind of continue this in a second on the other side. We're going to take one more break, and when we return, I'd like to get you to predict the future. This is Voices in Our Heads. When we come back, we'll have more with René Castro. This is Antonio Ruiz for PalacioMagazine.com. Welcome back to Voices in Our Heads, and I'm speaking with René Castro, Director of Community Engagement for Century Villages at Cabrillo. We spoke earlier about the challenges for dealing with homelessness, air quotes. Voters recently approved money for homeless services.
Yep.
And, of course, the legislature did some things as well, state legislature. I want to kind of keep on that theme of, is that alone going to solve the problem of homelessness and also the issues that go with it? So looking at it from a more holistic approach, talk a little bit more about what we as, LA County, as a city of Long Beach, as a society, because homelessness is not unique to us.
Right.
LA has a lot of issues. All you have to do is just drive through downtown LA. Some people want to just sort of like, as long as I don't see it, it's not a problem.
Right. But we're all seeing it now. I mean, even in the nicest neighborhoods. Well, I think, just really pleased to see Measure H passed. Of course, the LA County sales tax measure, which is going to provide $330 million a year in funding for support services. So with the city of LA, of course, you had Measure HHH, which is now providing additional capital for affordable housing, which is great. And, of course, Long Beach is looking at, with the mayor's leadership, various ways to look at how do we finance affordable housing in the city of Long Beach. So there's some major things that are happening to not only provide capital as well as support services that are very encouraging. But I frankly think that we have to just reorient our whole economy. As I said earlier, I think major swaths of our neighbors, our friends are not part of this new economy and are getting left behind. And certainly as we're seeing with more mechanization and industries, people are getting left behind. So I'm not an economist. I don't know the answer to that, but I think that a little bit of kindness goes a long way. And I would encourage all your listeners to carry just a little pouch, and put a resource guide in there. You can get one from the Long Beach Health Department, and it has a wonderful amount of resources in there for homeless people. And stick $5 in there, maybe a toothbrush and some toiletries, and just keep that on the side of your car.
Oh, that's an interesting suggestion.
Yeah, I gotta admit, I got it from my mother-in-law. She does that, and I love her to death. And so I'm gonna start doing that. So I started doing that, obviously, I'm going to get in trouble for mentioning giving money, but I think, along with the resources, I think that's a nice way of balancing it. So there are things that we can do to, immediately. And then I think with the mayor's efforts right now around financing affordable housing, stay involved. Right now, for example, the city is looking at short-term rentals and how the city can actually begin to maybe get some of those tax dollars back into the city to fund affordable housing. Right. So I think we're looking at structural ways of addressing the issue.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I keep coming back to this holistic thing, because I was just interesting how, and I forgot one of the comedians was talking about, for years, people living in quote unquote inner cities, dealing with everything from the impacts of gentrification and dealing with the impacts of the effects of substandard housing and all that stuff. And then when you start reading about in rural, small towns, how they're starting to get impacted by factories that leave, mechanization, all that stuff, and then the drug thing, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And eventually people are going to lose their homes, and so it's sort of like all of a sudden everybody is mindful of this, but this has been happening for a long time.
Right.
But now that everyone is suddenly very aware of it, it's the question then becomes, where do we, and I think it comes back to the local level, where do we as a society or as a city, where does it begin that we start taking, because we can't, how do I say this in a nice way? No, I can't say in a nice way. With the new government in place in Washington, D.C., you're not going to see those kinds of initiatives. I mean, particularly when you're seeing the federal budgets being cut. So what can we as individuals, besides giving someone
Right.
a pouch,
Yeah.
what else can we do?
Well, I think stay engaged. Every week on the city's agenda is an issue related to housing. Every week, and read the press telegram. Read Long Beach Post and all.
The media.
Yeah, the media, and stay involved. And what's happening right now at the federal level. Of course, we're watching very carefully. I think the thing that concerns us the most is now that you have a lot of corporate tax breaks, fewer corporations are going to be investing in, low-income housing tax credits. So what's happening is it's getting more and more difficult to actually build affordable housing. So that federal level is really impacting us locally. So call Alan Lowenthal, call your congressman. Thankfully, the state level, I think they're looking at this very carefully. But just stay informed. And what I would recommend is just bookmarking the city's website for the council agenda, and every once in a while check it out. And you can actually get email notices for their housing commission, and they can notify you when an agenda item comes up, and come out and just speak your mind. Participate in our democracy. That's it. You don't have to be Democrat or Republican or Libertarian, whatever it is, but just engage. And I found Long Beach to be a remarkably democratic town in terms of engagement.
Now for prediction, where do you think we're going to be a year from now when it comes to this issue of homelessness?
Oh, geez. Well, I think
optimistic, pessimistic.
Pessimistic. I mean, these things take decades, as you said earlier, to for these problems to come to full fruition, and they take decades to repair. I think we're part of a global economy now, and we haven't really kept up. So I think that our whole education system we have to look at and ensure that our education system and those opportunities are keeping pace with this economy, this global economy. Trump seems to think it's bringing back coal jobs. Well, I think it's making sure that every one of our young people is really engaged in this digital economy and very sophisticated engineering. We've got the best universities on the planet, and how is it that our young people aren't as successful? When I read the statistics that 14% of the students at Long Beach City College are homeless, 10% of the students within our CSU system are homeless. That shouldn't be the case. I mean, again, we'll take it one step at a time. But if I was predicting the future in a year, I don't think we're going to see much change. I think it's going to take a decade, frankly, of concerted investment and problem solving to really fix what we have.
Well, I'm sure you're going to be involved in all of that. I want to thank you very much for speaking with PalacioMagazine.com and Voices in Our Head. Do you want to share some contact information if someone wants to inquire further of you and your work, and also the website information?
Absolutely. So thank you, Antonio. It's such a great honor always to talk to you. So our website is www.centuryvillages.org. That's villages, S. And if you want to contact me, my email is rcastro@centuryvillages.org.
Thank you again. I'm Antonio Ruiz for Voices in Our Head on PalacioMagazine.com.